So, today we're tackling a massive question, one that really gets to the heart of what we think is fair. Is success inherited? I mean, are some of us just born with a huge head start simply because of our parents' education or how much money they have? For a long time, the answer seemed to be a pretty clear yes. But what if the data told a totally different, much more surprising story?
Seriously, just think about that for a second. Do you feel like your potential, your path, was kind of carved out by your parents' background? It's a really personal question, I know, but the answer has these huge implications for how we think about opportunity and, well, society itself.
For decades, the big idea in sociology was something called human capital theory. And it's actually a pretty simple concept. The thinking goes that better educated parents pass on all their advantages, not just money, but knowledge, connections, ambition, the whole shebang, and that gives their kids an undeniable leg up in life. It makes a lot of sense, right?
And listen, this wasn't just some vague theory, it was backed up by some major studies. A huge study back in 2000 in Moscow, for example, came to this incredibly blunt conclusion. The message couldn't have been clearer. If you want your child to do well in school, your own diploma is one of the most important things you can give them.
Okay, but here's the thing about big, sweeping theories. You gotta test them. Russia is just this massive, incredibly diverse country. So, would a rule that seems to hold true in a giant capital city like Moscow really apply everywhere else? To find out, researchers turn their eyes to a really fascinating and unique region, the Republic of Tatarstan.
So here's how they set it all up. In 2013, a team went out and surveyed over 2,000 ninth graders. These are kids who are all around 15 years old, right at that super critical moment where they're deciding what's next. And they didn't just look at grades. Oh no. They dug into everything. Family life, personal habits, their dreams, their ambitions, you name it.
And this right here was the million-dollar question. Was the data from Tatarstan going to confirm what that Moscow study and so many others had found? Would a parent's level of education turn out to be the #1 factor in predicting a kid's success? The stage was set for a pretty interesting reveal.
All right, so this is where it gets really interesting, because what they found when they actually crunched all those numbers, well, it pretty much turned all the conventional wisdom on its head.
The answer they got was a big, fat no. Now, let's be super clear. It's not that there was zero connection. There was, but the link was, and I'm quoting the researchers here, surprisingly weak. It just wasn't the powerful, destiny-defining force everyone thought it was.
To put a number on it for you, when they calculated the statistical link, the correlation, it was less than 0.3. Now, for any stats people listening, you know that is a weak relationship. Basically, knowing what diploma a parent had told you almost nothing about what their child's grades were going to be. Something else, something much more important, had to be at play.
So if it wasn't a parent's education, then what was driving success for these students in Tatarstan? This is where the study's findings get really powerful, because they started to uncover a completely different set of factors that actually mattered. The analysis just painted this fascinating picture. You know, all the factors everyone assumed would be huge, mom and dad's education, family income, they turned out to be really weak predictors. Instead, the things on the right side of the screen, those were the things that proved to be much more powerful. Let's dig into a couple of the biggest ones. First up, gender. And the difference here was just stark. Girls didn't just get better grades on average, they were also way more ambitious about their futures. They were a full 20% more likely to be planning on going to a university compared to the boys in their class. And next, something really specific to the region, the language spoken at home. Now, in this context, that was also a pretty good indicator of nationality. And the data clearly showed that students from Tatar-speaking families were more likely to get good grades than students from Russian-speaking families. This wasn't a fluke. It was a really consistent and significant finding. And the list just kept going. The things that really seemed to move the needle were things much closer to the student's own world. Things like their own personal drive, grit, or the influence of their friends. Were their friends ambitious too? Even the cultural capital at home, which they measured with something as simple as the number of books on the shelves. It turns out these personal and social factors were just way more decisive.
So what's the upshot of all this? What's the big takeaway from this really deep dive into the lives of 2,000 teenagers in Tatarstan?
Well, the main conclusion is actually incredibly optimistic. It suggests that a student's future isn't just locked in by their parents' background. Instead, factors that are much more within their own control, their own hard work, the friends they choose, their environment, those things have a much bigger impact. It seems that destiny, thankfully, is not something you simply inherit.
And this isn't just some academic exercise. It has real-world consequences. The researchers made some very specific recommendations based on this. They basically argued that for Tatarstan, spending a bunch of money on programs to make up for a parent's low education level, well, that might be a waste. Instead, they said resources should go directly to the groups that the data showed were struggling the most, specifically boys and Russian-speaking students. It's a smart, data-driven way to tackle a real problem.
And that really leaves us with one final question to chew on. This study found the real drivers of success in one part of the world, and they did it by challenging old assumptions. So it kind of forces us to ask, what hidden factors might be shaping success right here, in our own communities? And what amazing truths could we uncover if we just dared to look past the obvious?